All right, so reading. We are going to do a little review on Martin Luther King Jr. because it was an important book. Raise your hand if you liked the book. I would hope everybody's hands go up. Yeah. Okay, good. And yesterday we celebrated what? Why do we not have school? Christian.
Martin Luther King birthday?
Yeah. Well, yes. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. He has a day now just for him. So now when we have this day, it'll be a little more significant because you read about him and studied about him. You're going to do some more research on him. So when I say you're going to do a biography paper about Martin Luther King Jr., do you think this book is going to be a good source for you?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So when you are writing a biography versus an opinion paper or a thank you note or about an animal, what do you think you're going to be using in your paper that was used in the book? Starts with a D. M. Yes. So let's you can go back to our wonderful timeline at the back of the book that gives you a timeline of his life. I would like for you to quickly skim it, and I would like for you to share with me something one of these dates or events that you think is most significant and why. So look at the dates, see what triggers in your memory, and then tell me, or any event in the book. If you have an event in this book that triggers a memory that you find most significant or important, what is it and why? There are many. You don't have to have the exact date per se, but you can just tell me the event that you thought was the most significant to you when you read the book. What happened in Martin Luther King's life that you thought was most important? What event? Yes, Olivia.
When Martin leads a peaceful march from Selma to Montgomery.
So that was the last thing he did, isn't it? The Selma. So in 1965, on your timeline, leads a peaceful march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, demanding voting rights for Black Americans. So that was his last big march. Very good, Olivia. Thank you for sharing that. What other event was significant to you, Ella?
In 1964, when Martin was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
Very good. That was a big victory, wasn't it? Grayson.
Leads a boycott of white-owned businesses in Birmingham, Alabama. I had a great speech at a really in Washington, D.C.
So you had two. You liked the boycott. Does that include the bus boycott as well? Is that what you were thinking of? Yes. And then I Have a Dream. Very good. Those were two very big events, weren't they? Jonathan.
On May 4th, 1960, the police stopped Martin in his car.
And did they let him go? What happened?
He went to jail.
Yes. And why did they pull him over? Do you remember? It was
Because,
something very insignificant, wasn't it?
because he had an Alabama driver's license.
Yes. And so he got sent to jail for 8 days for that. Jack.
Mine is the same as mine.
Was Jonathan? Jeremiah.
On May 2nd, a demonstration was planned.
Do you have a date on that?
On May 2nd.
What year? Is that on the timeline or what page are you on, bud?
I'm on page 60.
60. Okay. Okay, so this was sometime in the 60s. So why was that significant to you? This was when he was in Birmingham. And remember, this is when the children and the teenagers had their walk, and then on May 2nd, a huge demonstration was planned. Thousands of people wanted to take part. So that was, where was that? Bull Connor. That was in Alabama, I believe. Yes, Birmingham. So why is that significant? Why was that significant to you, Jeremiah? Was it, or you just, that was just one date that you pulled out?
One day that I pulled
Okay, there are many, aren't there? Do you think that Martin Luther King Jr. was a very busy man? Or did he sit around and drink tea?
No.
He was a very busy man. Like Jeremiah just, I mean, if you flip through the book, there's a date about something significant that he did. What was his main objective? What was he trying to do? What was his cause all about? Sheen. And segregation. So then it moved on to something else. There was a different group or a different organization and a different cause that he was striving, but it had a very significant What was the civil rights movement? Because he was a leader in that. What was that? What were they advocating for? What were they marching for? What were they protesting for? The rights of animals?
No.
That dogs and cats get along?
No.
What was it? What was the civil rights movement? What was the whole objective of this movement? Because this, friends, is significant to Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy. Jack?
To stop segregation?
Well, segregation was just a part of it, but it was much bigger than segregation. That was part of it. That was a stepping stone of it. Christian?
That blacks and white will get along together, and they can ride in the same bus and stuff.
Well, that was segregation, but you are on the right path. So that was the beginning when he worked on segregation. But then it evolved into something bigger, the civil rights movement, and it's still going on today. It's equal rights for who? Emmy. For all people, but they were protesting and they were doing their marches and they were doing their what? For what particular group of people? Friends, everybody's hand should be up. Otherwise, I believe you didn't read the book. Who was Martin Luther King Jr. fighting for? James?
Black.
Yes, thank you. Equal rights. Because they didn't have the same amount of, they weren't getting paid the same, their living conditions weren't the same, and that is what Martin Luther King Jr. was fighting for. Right?
Yeah.
Now, was he peaceful or was he violent? Martin Luther King Jr., he protested peacefully or with violence? Everybody's hands should be up for this. Was he a peaceful protester or did he endorse violence? Grayson? Yes. Did he ever merge into violence?
No.
Ever?
No.
No. Up to his very last march, which was Selma, he never endorsed violence. Now, there were other leaders in the civil rights movement that did endorse violence. Can somebody name one of them that was in our book? Grant? Malcolm X. Very good. What was Martin Luther King Jr. married? And if so, what was her name? She also played a strong role in this book as well. In fact, she took on his movement after he was killed. Jeremiah.
Coretta.
Yes, Coretta. Do they have children?
Yes.
How many?
4.
Very good. Besides a civil rights leader, what else did Martin Luther King Jr. do? He trained and he went to school for what? What did he do? He went to school for. His father was also this. Wow, friends. What was Martin Luther King Jr. if he was not doing the civil rights movement? Doing protests, helping people. What was he doing? Jonathan?
Minister?
Yes, he was a minister. Any other event or accomplishment that you thought significant from this book that about Martin Luther King Jr.? Helen?
1965 to 1956 leads the Montgomery bus boycott.
Boycott, yes. Was that early on in his life or was it later in his life? Was that one of the first things he did or was that later on? M. Yes, that was one of the first things he did. So that would be considered early on in his life. Anything else? Did he, how can I say? Was he very intelligent? There was a significant bit of information we found out about Martin Luther King Jr. Does anybody remember? He, Helen.
He skipped 2 grades.
Yes. Remember, he went to Morehouse College when he was only 17 or 16 years old. So he was very young to go to college. Who else went to college at Morehouse? So he was at 15 years old, he graduated from high school. 15. So yes. Did he value education? Yes, he did. Because he went to get his doctorate, right? So he did value education a great deal. But who else went to Morehouse besides Martin Luther King Jr., Jeremiah?
His dad.
His dad. And then we learned, who else? Owen.
Martin Luther King III.
Yes, his son. So 3 generations went to Morehouse College, which is kind of an interesting fact. Why am I doing this? Well, not only is it important to review the book, but you need to be thinking about this stuff because this information, because you are going to be writing a paper. And we'll be talking about that more tomorrow because we will have writing class. So you're going to keep your book so you can use this as research. But I would highly recommend that you go above and beyond just this book to do some research. You might need to use your Google. If you can borrow a computer or a phone, or if you have one, you can do the research on your computer on Google. You can get books, look things up, research. What is research? James.
To find more about something.
More information, to delve deeper, dig deeper into that. In this case, it's going to be Martin Luther King Jr. The nice thing is there is a ton of information out there about Martin Luther King Jr. because he was a very, very important person in our society, in our world for that matter. Before we end, who was some people that played an important role in his life that also did the same type of work as he did? Who inspired Martin Luther King Jr., Grayson?
Gandhi.
Gandhi. Yes. Who inspired him to start the bus boycott? There was a significant individual who inspired him to do that, Emmy. Rosa Parks. Don't know if at the end of the book we learned about this person. We didn't talk about him much, And he lived in South Africa, and he was doing the same thing as Martin Luther King Jr., but only in South Africa. And instead of being called segregation, it was called apartheid. Does anybody know who that significant person was? Yes. What's that? No, that's who shot him. Nelson Mandela. Has anyone ever heard of him? Also a very important figure in our world. Did the very similar thing as Martin Luther King Jr. So people, too, who inspired him? These are things that are in a book. These are also things that inspired Martin Luther King Jr. So this could be things that you could put in your paper. We will be honing things down so it is not a book, but a paper. Because there's so much information about him. That's why you have to go through, skim, figure out significant things that you might want to write about, and that is where you will start. But we're not going to do that right now. So I'm going to stop this. What we're going to do now